The morning mist clung to the ancient walls of Ravencrest Palace like secrets waiting to be unveiled. Lady Catherine Ashworth walked briskly through the marble corridors, her heels clicking against the polished floor with purpose and determination. As the beloved Princess of Valdoria, she had always been the people's favorite, known for her charitable work and genuine warmth. But today, something was different. There was a tension in the air that even the ornate tapestries seemed to absorb. Prince Alexander stood by the grand windows of the throne room, watching the gardens below where gardeners tended to the royal roses. His marriage to Lady Cordelia Blackthorne 2 years ago had been politically advantageous but personally challenging. While the kingdoms celebrated their union, those within the palace walls knew the truth. It was a marriage of convenience that had grown increasingly strained. Lady Cordelia entered Alexander's private study without knocking, a privilege she had claimed as his wife. Her emerald dress rustled against the Persian rugs as she moved with calculated grace toward his mahogany desk. Alexander noticed immediately that she carried a leather portfolio under her arm, one he didn't recognize. "We need to discuss Catherine," Cordelia said without preamble, setting the portfolio down with deliberate force. Her voice carried an edge that Alexander had grown accustomed to over the months. Alexander turned from the window, his expression guarded. "What about Catherine? She's been nothing but supportive of our rule and helpful to the kingdom's causes." Cordelia's laugh was cold and sharp. "Supportive? Alexander, you're more naive than I thought. Your precious sister-in-law has been building quite the network of influence behind our backs." The prince moved closer to his desk, his eyes fixed on the mysterious portfolio. "What are you talking about, Cordelia?" "I'm talking about information, dear husband. Information that could change everything we know about Catherine's true intentions." Cordelia opened the portfolio with theatrical flair, revealing stacks of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be correspondence. Alexander's face darkened as he recognized some of the documents. They were from Catherine's private charitable foundation, her personal correspondence with various political figures, and detailed records of her public appearances and speeches. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter where I got them?" Cordelia's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "What matters is what they reveal. Your beloved Catherine has been positioning herself quite strategically, hasn't she?" The documents spread across the desk told a story that Alexander found difficult to believe. Meeting schedules with foreign dignitaries, financial records showing significant donations to her foundation from questionable sources, and correspondence that seemed to suggest Catherine was building political alliances independent of the royal family's official positions. "This proves nothing improper," Alexander said firmly, though doubt had begun to creep into his voice. "Catherine has always been involved in diplomatic relations. It's part of her role." Cordelia pulled out a particular document and placed it directly in front of Alexander. It was a letter, written in Catherine's distinctive handwriting, addressed to Lord Pemberton, a known critic of the current royal administration. The letter discussed necessary changes and new directions for the kingdom. "Read it, Alexander. Read it," Cordelia insisted, her finger pointing to specific passages. "She's not just involved in diplomacy. She's actively working to undermine our authority." Alexander picked up the letter, his hands trembling slightly as he read Catherine's words. The language was careful and diplomatic, but certain phrases stood out. "The current administration lacks the vision necessary for our kingdom's future, and I believe alternative leadership structures should be seriously considered." This could be taken out of context, Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Catherine would never." "Wouldn't she?" Cordelia interrupted. "Think about it, Alexander. She's always been more popular than either of us. The people love her. The media adores her. Even foreign leaders seem to prefer dealing with her rather than with us. What if all of this popularity wasn't just coincidental?" The prince sank into his leather chair, overwhelmed by the implications. Catherine had indeed been remarkably successful in her public role. Her charitable initiatives received widespread support. Her diplomatic efforts were praised internationally, and her public appearances drew massive crowds. He had always attributed this to her natural charisma and genuine care for people. "But she's family, Cordelia. She's been loyal to the crown, to our kingdom. This must be some kind of misunderstanding." Cordelia moved around the desk to stand beside Alexander, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I understand this is difficult for you. Catherine has always been like a sister to you. But we can't let personal feelings cloud our judgment when the stability of our reign is at stake." She pulled out another document, this one, showing financial transfers from Catherine's foundation to various political organizations and media outlets. "Look at these payments, Alexander. She's been funding opposition groups and friendly journalists. This isn't coincidental or innocent." The evidence was mounting, and Alexander found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about Catherine. The woman he had trusted, the royal family member he had relied on for support and counsel, appeared to be building a shadow network of influence. "What do you suggest we do?" Alexander asked, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. "We need to confront her," Cordelia said decisively. "But we need to be careful. If she is planning something, we can't give her time to destroy evidence or rally her supporters." Alexander stood up, pacing behind his desk as he processed the information. The kingdom of Valdoria had always prided itself on stability and unity within the royal family. This potential betrayal threatened not just their personal relationships, but the very foundation of their rule. "We'll need to involve Captain Morrison and his security team," Alexander said finally. "If Catherine has been operating independently, we need to know the full extent of her activities." Cordelia nodded approvingly. "I've already taken the liberty of alerting Captain Morrison. He's reviewing these documents as we speak and conducting discreet inquiries into Catherine's recent activities." The prince looked at his wife with a mixture of appreciation and wariness. While he was grateful for her vigilance, he couldn't help but wonder how she had managed to gather such extensive information about Catherine's private affairs. "Cordelia, I have to ask, how exactly did you obtain these documents? This level of detail suggests significant surveillance or—" "Does it really matter, Alexander?" she interrupted smoothly. "What matters is that we now have the information we need to protect our kingdom from potential internal threats." As the afternoon sun began to set over Ravencrest Palace, casting long shadows across the ornate study, Alexander realized that the comfortable world he had known was about to change dramatically. The revelation about Catherine's activities would force him to make decisions that would affect not just their personal relationships, but the future of the entire kingdom. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the bonds of family, loyalty, and power within the royal house of Valdoria. The following morning brought an unseasonable chill to Ravencrest Palace, as if the very atmosphere reflected the growing tension within its walls. Captain Harrison Morrison, head of royal security, sat across from Prince Alexander in the same study where the disturbing revelations had unfolded just hours before. The leather portfolio lay open between them, its contents now organized into neat piles representing different aspects of Catherine's alleged activities. Captain Morrison, a man in his 50s with graying temples and sharp blue eyes, had served the royal family for over 20 years. His loyalty was unquestioned, his discretion absolute, and his ability to uncover truth legendary within palace circles. He studied the documents with the methodical precision of a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. "Your Highness, I've completed my preliminary investigation into Lady Catherine's activities," Morrison began, his voice measured and professional. "I must say, the scope of her independent operations is more extensive than these documents initially suggested." Alexander leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "What else have you discovered, Captain?" Morrison opened a separate folder he had brought with him. "Lady Catherine has been maintaining regular communication with at least 12 foreign ambassadors, 7 prominent media executives, and 15 influential business leaders, all outside official channels. These communications have been ongoing for approximately 18 months. The prince felt his stomach tighten. 18 months ago was shortly after his marriage to Cordelia, when the kingdom was still adjusting to the new royal dynamic. "Are you suggesting she's been planning this since my marriage? It's difficult to determine her exact motivations without direct questioning," Morrison replied diplomatically. "However, the timing is noteworthy. Her independent activities appear to have accelerated significantly following your wedding." Lady Cordelia entered the study at that moment, having been summoned by Alexander. She wore a deep blue dress that complemented her dark hair, and her expression carried a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "Captain Morrison, I trust you found our information useful?" Morrison nodded respectfully. Indeed, Your Highness. Though I must ask, how did you manage to obtain such detailed records of Lady Catherine's private correspondence and financial transactions? Cordelia exchanged a quick glance with Alexander before responding. I have my sources within the palace staff. People are more observant than one might think, and they're loyal to the crown. The captain made a note in his file but didn't pursue the matter further. His job was to assess threats to royal security, not to question the methods by which information was obtained, provided they weren't illegal. What concerns me most, Morrison continued, is the pattern of her meetings with foreign dignitaries. Lady Catherine has been presenting herself as an alternative voice within the royal family, someone who might offer different perspectives on policy matters. Alexander stood and walked to the window, his mind racing. But that's always been Catherine's role. She's been our diplomat, our bridge to the international community. We encouraged her to build these relationships. Yes, Your Highness, but there's a difference between official diplomatic relations and what appears to be happening here. Morrison pulled out a specific document. This is a transcript of a conversation between Lady Catherine and Ambassador Reginald Thornfield from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria. In it, she refers to the possibility of new leadership perspectives and suggests that change might come sooner than expected. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Ambassador Thornfield represented a kingdom that had long-standing territorial disputes with Valdoria. Any suggestion of internal instability could be seen as an invitation for external pressure or interference. Cordelia moved to stand beside her husband, her hand finding his arm in a gesture of support. Alexander, we can't ignore what's right in front of us. Catherine may not realize it, but she's potentially compromising our kingdom's security. There's more, Morrison said grimly. He produced a series of photographs that showed Catherine at various private meetings and social gatherings. These were taken by our surveillance team over the past month. Notice how she's consistently meeting with the same group of individuals. Lord Pemberton, Duchess Eleanor Fairfax, and Sir Marcus Blackwood. These three have been vocal critics of recent royal policies. Alexander studied the photographs, recognizing each of the individuals mentioned. They were prominent members of the nobility who had expressed concerns about his administration's direction, particularly regarding economic policies and international relations. They call themselves the Progressive Alliance, Morrison explained. Officially, they're simply a discussion group focused on policy reform. Unofficially, our intelligence suggests they may be positioning themselves as an alternative power structure within the kingdom. The implications were staggering. Catherine, knowingly or unknowingly, appeared to be at the center of a potential challenge to Alexander's authority. Whether her actions constituted treason or simply naive political engagement remained to be seen, but the threat to stability was real. Captain, what are our options? Alexander asked, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership. We have several courses of action, Morrison replied. We could continue surveillance to gather more information, confront Lady Catherine directly to gauge her intentions, or take immediate action to limit her access to sensitive information and restrict her movements. Cordelia spoke up decisively. I think we need to act quickly. Every day we delay gives her more opportunity to solidify whatever plans she might have. We can't risk the stability of our reign for the sake of family sentiment. Alexander turned to face them both, his expression torn between duty and personal affection. Catherine has been more than family to me. She's been an advisor, a confidant, and a trusted partner in leading this kingdom. I find it almost impossible to believe she would deliberately work against us. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who can hurt us most, Cordelia said softly. I understand this is painful, Alexander. But we have a responsibility to our kingdom that transcends personal relationships. Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Your Highness, if I may suggest a middle course of action, we could arrange a private meeting with Lady Catherine under the pretense of routine administrative matters. This would give us the opportunity to observe her behavior and perhaps gain insight into her true intentions without immediately revealing our knowledge of her activities. Alexander considered the suggestion. It would allow him to look Catherine in the eye and judge for himself whether the woman he trusted was capable of betraying that trust. Very well. Arrange a meeting for this afternoon. Make it seem routine. Perhaps a review of her upcoming charitable commitments. And in the meantime? Cordelia asked. In the meantime, we implement discreet security measures, Morrison replied. I'll have my team monitor all communications in and out of the palace, and will place additional surveillance on Lady Catherine's quarters and activities. As the meeting concluded, Alexander found himself questioning not just Catherine's loyalty, but his own judgment. How had he missed the signs of her growing independence? Had his trust been misplaced, or was there an innocent explanation for her actions? The afternoon meeting with Catherine would provide answers, but Alexander suspected that regardless of what he learned, the comfortable dynamics of the royal family would never be the same again. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and in the world of royal politics, doubt could be just as dangerous as confirmed betrayal. The palace halls seemed longer and more shadowed as Alexander prepared himself for what might be the most difficult conversation of his reign. The royal library had always been Catherine's favorite room in Ravencrest Palace. Surrounded by centuries-old volumes and bathed in the warm glow of afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows, it was here that she felt most at peace. She arrived for her scheduled meeting with Alexander, expecting nothing more than a routine discussion about her upcoming charity gala for children's education. Catherine wore a simple but elegant cream-colored dress, her auburn hair pulled back in a classic style that emphasized her natural grace. She carried a portfolio containing details about the gala, including guest lists, fundraising targets, and educational program proposals. As she settled into one of the leather armchairs near the fireplace, she noticed that Alexander seemed unusually tense. "Good afternoon, Alexander," she said warmly, offering her characteristic smile. "I'm so glad we could meet today. I have some wonderful updates about the education initiative that I think will excite you." Prince Alexander stood near the window, his posture rigid and formal. The easy camaraderie they had always shared seemed absent, replaced by an atmosphere Catherine couldn't quite understand. "Catherine, thank you for coming. We do need to discuss your recent activities, though. Perhaps not in the way you're expecting." Something in his tone made Catherine pause. She set down her portfolio and studied Alexander's face, noting the strain around his eyes and the tight set of his jaw. "Is something wrong?" "You seem troubled." "I am troubled," Alexander admitted, moving to sit across from her. "Catherine, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Catherine's heart began to beat faster, though she couldn't identify why. "Of course, Alexander. We've always been honest with each other." "What's this about?" "It's about your relationships with certain members of the nobility, your communications with foreign dignitaries, and your independent activities over the past several months." The words hit Catherine like cold water. Her mind raced as she tried to understand how her legitimate diplomatic and charitable work could be construed as problematic. "Alexander, I'm not sure what you're implying. Everything I do is in service to the kingdom and in support of your reign. Is it?" Alexander leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. "Catherine, are you aware that your recent actions could be interpreted as building a power base independent of the crown?" Catherine stood abruptly, genuine confusion and hurt flooding her features. "A power base?" "Alexander, what are you talking about? I've been working on education reform, diplomatic relations, and charitable initiatives. These are the responsibilities you assigned to me when you became king, but you've been conducting these activities through unofficial channels," Alexander pressed. "Meeting privately with foreign ambassadors, corresponding with political opposition figures, funding various organizations without oversight from the Royal Council." The pieces began falling into place for Catherine, and she felt a chill of understanding. Someone's been watching me, monitoring my activities, going through my private correspondence. Her voice carried a note of betrayal that made Alexander flinch. "Catherine, we had to investigate when certain information came to light. Information that suggested you might be working against the interests of the crown." "Against the interests of the crown?" Catherine's voice rose in disbelief. "Alexander, everything I've done has been to strengthen our kingdom's position internationally and to address the social issues that affect our people. How could that be against the crown's interests?" She began pacing, her mind working through the implications of what Alexander was telling her. What information? Who provided it? And why wasn't I consulted before this investigation began? Alexander's resolve wavered as he watched Catherine's genuine distress. The woman before him didn't seem like someone harboring treacherous intentions. Her confusion and hurt appeared authentic, making him question the conclusions he and Cordelia had reached. There were documents, Catherine, letters and financial records that seemed to suggest you were building alternative alliances and potentially undermining royal authority. Catherine stopped pacing and faced Alexander directly. Show me these documents. I want to see exactly what you're referring to. I don't have them with me now, but... Then get them, Catherine interrupted, her tone firm but not hostile. If I'm being accused of working against you, against our kingdom, I have the right to see the evidence. Alexander stood and moved toward the door, but Catherine's voice stopped him. Alexander, wait. Before you bring whatever documents you have, I need you to answer one question honestly. He turned back to face her, noting the pain in her eyes. Do you truly believe, in your heart, that I could betray you or our kingdom? After everything we've been through together, after all the years I've supported your rule and worked alongside you, do you honestly think I'm capable of treason? The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither could quite cross. Alexander found himself looking into the eyes of someone who had been like a sister to him, someone whose loyalty he had never questioned until now. I don't want to believe it, he said quietly. But I can't ignore evidence, Catherine. I can't let personal feelings compromise my judgment when the security of our kingdom might be at stake. Catherine nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position Alexander found himself in. I appreciate your honesty. Now please, bring me these documents so I can explain my actions. I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding. As Alexander left to retrieve the evidence, Catherine remained in the library, her mind racing through recent events. She thought about her meetings with various political figures, her correspondence with foreign diplomats, and her charitable initiatives. Everything she had done had been motivated by a genuine desire to serve her kingdom and support Alexander's rule. But as she reflected on her activities, she began to see how they might be misinterpreted by someone looking for signs of disloyalty. Her independent approach to diplomacy, her willingness to engage with political opposition figures in the interest of unity, and her sometimes critical perspective on royal policies could all be twisted into evidence of betrayal. More troubling was the realization that someone had been systematically monitoring her activities and correspondence. The invasion of privacy was disturbing enough, but the deliberate collection and presentation of information to suggest treachery felt like something more sinister. When Alexander returned with Captain Morrison and the portfolio of evidence, Catherine was ready. She had spent the intervening minutes preparing herself for what might be the fight of her life, not just for her reputation, but for her place in the royal family, and her ability to continue serving her kingdom. As the men entered the library, Catherine straightened her shoulders and prepared to defend herself against accusations she still found almost impossible to believe were being made. Now, she said with quiet determination, show me exactly what has led you to question my loyalty. The portfolio opened like Pandora's box, spilling its contents across the polished mahogany table in the royal library. Catherine examined each document with growing understanding and mounting anger, not at being discovered, but at how her legitimate activities had been twisted into evidence of treachery. Captain Morrison stood silently by the door while Alexander watched Catherine's face for any sign of guilt or deception. This letter to Lord Pemberton, Catherine said, holding up the correspondence that had so alarmed Alexander, was part of a series of discussions about education reform. When I wrote about necessary changes, I was referring to our outdated curriculum standards, not your leadership. She set the letter aside and picked up the financial records. And these payments to various organizations? They're grants from my foundation to literacy programs, women's shelters and job training centers. Everything has been properly documented and approved by the Royal Accounting Office. Alexander leaned forward, studying Catherine's face carefully. Her explanations seemed reasonable, but Cordelia had warned him that Catherine was intelligent enough to have plausible explanations prepared. What about the meetings with foreign ambassadors? Captain Morrison asked, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Some of those communications suggest you were offering alternative perspectives on official royal policy. Catherine's eyes flashed with indignation. Alternative perspectives? Captain, that's called diplomacy. When Ambassador Thornfield expressed concerns about our trade policies, I listened to his perspective and promised to relay his concerns to the appropriate channels. That's what diplomats do. They communicate. She stood and began gathering the scattered documents. What troubles me most about this entire situation isn't that you investigated my activities. Kings have a responsibility to ensure security. What troubles me is that someone collected this information, deliberately misinterpreted it, and presented it to you as evidence of betrayal, without ever speaking to me directly. Alexander felt a chill of realization. Are you suggesting someone deliberately manipulated this information? I'm not suggesting it, Alexander. I'm stating it as fact. Catherine's voice carried a steel that Alexander had rarely heard from her. Someone wanted you to doubt my loyalty, and they succeeded. Captain Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Your Highness, if I may interject, upon further review of the evidence, I must admit that each individual item can indeed be interpreted innocently. However, the pattern of activities, when viewed collectively by someone looking for evidence of wrongdoing, they appear suspicious, Catherine finished. But when viewed by someone understanding the full context of my work, they represent exactly what they are. Legitimate royal duties performed independently but loyally. She turned to face Alexander directly. The real question, brother, is who provided this information to you, and what did they gain by convincing you I was a threat? The word brother hit Alexander like a physical blow. Catherine had always been more than an in-law to him. She had been family in the truest sense. The realization that he had allowed doubt to poison that relationship filled him with shame and growing anger at whoever had orchestrated this situation. Cordelia brought the information to me, Alexander admitted. She said she had sources among the palace staff who were concerned about your activities. Catherine's expression hardened. Cordelia. Of course. She moved to the window looking out at the gardens where she had spent countless hours walking and planning her charitable initiatives. Alexander, has it ever occurred to you that your wife might have her own reasons for wanting me discredited? What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you to think about the dynamics that have developed since your marriage. Catherine turned back to face him. Cordelia has made it clear that she views me as competition for influence within the royal family. She's been systematically undermining my position for months. Alexander felt his world shifting beneath him. The woman he had trusted with evidence of Catherine's supposed betrayal was now being accused of orchestrating that very betrayal. Catherine, these are serious accusations. Are they more serious than accusations of treason? Catherine asked pointedly. Alexander, I need you to ask yourself some difficult questions. Who benefits most from my removal from the inner circle of royal advisors? Who has been pushing for changes to the traditional structure of royal duties? And who had the access and motivation to compile this dossier of misinterpreted information? Captain Morrison stepped forward. Your Highness, if I may suggest a course of action. We should investigate the sources of this information as thoroughly as we investigated Lady Catherine's activities. If there has been manipulation or deliberate misinformation, we need to understand the full scope. Alexander sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. If Catherine was correct, then he had been manipulated into doubting one of his most trusted advisors. If she was wrong, then she was deflecting blame in a highly sophisticated manner. Either way, his ability to trust his own judgment felt compromised. There's something else you should know, Catherine said quietly. I've been aware for weeks that someone was monitoring my activities. I noticed staff asking unusual questions, communications being delayed, and meetings being rescheduled without explanation. I assumed it was routine security measures, but now I understand it was surveillance. Why didn't you report your suspicions? Morrison asked. Because I trusted that if there were security concerns about my activities, someone would speak to me directly, rather than conducting covert investigations. Catherine's tone carried disappointment and hurt. I trusted that my family would give me the benefit of the doubt. The weight of Catherine's words settled over the room like a heavy curtain. Alexander realized that regardless of the truth about any potential threats, he had damaged something precious. The trust and bond that had existed between them. Catherine, what do you propose we do now? Alexander asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion and regret. Now we uncover the truth. Catherine replied firmly. We investigate who compiled this information and why. We examine the motivations of everyone involved, and we determine whether this kingdom is going to be ruled by paranoia and manipulation or by trust and honest communication. She moved toward the door, then paused. Alexander, I've spent years supporting your reign because I believe in your vision for our kingdom. But I won't continue to serve in an environment where my loyalty is constantly questioned and my activities are monitored like those of a suspected criminal. The ultimatum was clear, though unstated. Alexander would need to choose between continuing to doubt Catherine or investigating the possibility that he had been deceived by someone much closer to him. As Catherine left the library, Alexander found himself facing the most difficult decision of his reign. Not just who to trust, but whether his marriage and his kingdom could survive the truth, whatever that truth might be. The confrontation that would change everything began at exactly 7 o'clock that evening, as the sun set behind Ravencrest Palace and cast long shadows across the marble floors. Prince Alexander had spent the afternoon wrestling with Catherine's accusations, and the growing realization that he might have been manipulated by the person closest to him. Now, as he waited in the throne room with Captain Morrison, he prepared for what might be the most difficult conversation of his life. Lady Cordelia entered the throne room with her usual grace, wearing an elegant black evening gown that seemed to emphasize the gravity of the situation. She smiled warmly at Alexander, apparently unaware that the afternoon had brought revelations that would challenge everything she had worked to achieve. "Alexander, darling, you look troubled. I hope your meeting with Catherine went well?" Cordelia's tone was solicitous, but Alexander noticed something he had missed before, a calculating quality to her concern. "The meeting was enlightening," Alexander replied carefully. "Please, sit down, Cordelia. We need to discuss some important matters." As Cordelia settled into the chair opposite him, Captain Morrison stepped forward with a new folder in his hands. The afternoon had been productive for the security chief, who had used Catherine's revelations to guide a more thorough investigation into the source of the original accusations. "Your Highness," Morrison began, addressing Cordelia formally, "we've conducted a review of how the information about Lady Catherine's activities was obtained and compiled. We have some questions about your methods and sources." Cordelia's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, Captain. I'm happy to clarify anything that might help protect our kingdom's security." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes fixed on his wife's face. "Cordelia, you told me you had sources among the palace staff who were concerned about Catherine's activities. I need you to identify these sources." "Well, it wasn't any single individual," Cordelia replied, her voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. "It was more a matter of observing patterns, listening to conversations, piecing together information from various sources." Captain Morrison opened his folder. "Your Highness, we've interviewed the entire palace staff this afternoon. Not a single member reported providing information about Lady Catherine's activities to you or expressing concerns about her loyalty." The statement hung in the air like an accusation. Cordelia's face remained calm, but Alexander noticed her hands gripping the arms of her chair more tightly. "Perhaps they were reluctant to admit their involvement," Cordelia suggested. "Staff members are often hesitant to acknowledge reporting on members of the royal family." "Or perhaps," Alexander said quietly, "there were no staff sources at all." The mask finally slipped from Cordelia's face, revealing something harder and more calculating beneath. She studied Alexander's expression and seemed to realize that denials would no longer be effective. "Alexander, everything I did was to protect you and our position," she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "Catherine has been building influence that threatens your authority. Whether her intentions were treacherous or simply naive, the result was the same, a weakening of your power base." Alexander stood and moved to the windows, looking out at the kingdom he was sworn to protect. "So you decided to manufacture evidence of her betrayal?" "I didn't manufacture anything," Cordelia protested, rising from her chair. "I simply interpreted her activities in light of their potential consequences. Everything in that portfolio was real, Alexander. Her meetings, her correspondence, her financial transactions, all of it actually happened." "But you deliberately misrepresented the context and motivations," Captain Morrison interjected. "You presented innocent activities as evidence of treason." Cordelia whirled to face the captain, her composure finally cracking. "Innocent? Captain, you're more naive than I thought. Catherine has been positioning herself as an alternative power center within this kingdom. She's more popular than either Alexander or myself. She has extensive international connections, and she has the support of influential nobles. How long do you think it would be before someone suggested she might make a better ruler? The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Alexander turned from the window to stare at his wife with growing understanding and horror. This was never about protecting the kingdom, he said slowly. This was about eliminating someone you saw as competition. Cordelia's laugh was bitter and sharp. Competition? Alexander, Catherine represents more than competition. She represents everything this kingdom values more than us. The people love her charity work, the media adores her style, foreign leaders respect her intelligence, and the nobility trusts her judgment. How long do you think our reign will last when everyone is comparing us unfavorably to your perfect sister-in-law? The truth spilled out like water from a broken dam. Alexander realized that his wife's insecurity and ambition had led her to orchestrate an elaborate scheme to destroy Catherine's reputation and position within the royal family. Captain Morrison, what are our legal options in this situation? Alexander asked, his voice heavy with the weight of what needed to be done. Your Highness, deliberately providing false information about a member of the royal family with intent to cause harm to their position constitutes a serious breach of royal protocol, Morrison replied carefully. The specific consequences would depend on your decision regarding prosecution. Cordelia moved toward Alexander, desperation now evident in her voice. Alexander, please. We can work through this. Catherine can remain in her position, but with appropriate oversight. We can restructure her role to ensure proper channels are followed. We don't need to let this situation destroy our marriage or your reign. Alexander looked at the woman he had married, seeing clearly for the first time the ambition and calculation that had driven her actions. The love he had hoped might grow between them seemed impossible now, poisoned by betrayal and manipulation. Cordelia, what you've done isn't just a breach of protocol. You've forced me to question the loyalty of someone who has been nothing but faithful to our kingdom. You've damaged relationships that took years to build. And you've shown me that your primary concern isn't the welfare of our people or the stability of our reign, it's your own power and position. Tears began to flow down Cordelia's face, though whether they were genuine or calculated, Alexander could no longer tell. I love you, Alexander. Everything I did was because I love you and I want our reign to succeed. If you loved me, Alexander replied sadly, you would have trusted me to handle any concerns about Catherine through honest communication rather than manipulation and deceit. He moved to the door of the throne room, pausing to look back at the woman who had been his queen. Captain Morrison will escort you to your chambers. Tomorrow we'll discuss the terms of your departure from Ravencrest Palace. Cordelia's face went pale. Departure? Alexander, you can't be serious. I'm your queen. We're married. You're right, Alexander said quietly. We are married, but a marriage built on deception and manipulation isn't a marriage I can continue to honor, and a queen who works against the interests of her own family isn't a queen this kingdom needs. As Captain Morrison stepped forward to escort Cordelia from the throne room, Alexander felt the weight of his decision settling over him like a heavy cloak. He had lost a wife, but perhaps he had saved something more valuable, his relationship with Catherine and his ability to trust his own judgment. The palace guards at the main gate would later report seeing a royal carriage departing Ravencrest Palace in the early morning hours, carrying a single passenger toward the kingdom's borders. Lady Cordelia's reign as queen had ended not with ceremony or celebration, but with the quiet acknowledgement that some betrayals cannot be forgiven or forgotten. Alexander would spend the following weeks rebuilding trust with Catherine and implementing new protocols to ensure that personal ambition could never again threaten the stability of the royal family. The kingdom would emerge stronger from the crisis, but the cost in personal terms would serve as a permanent reminder that even in palaces, the greatest threats often come from those closest to power.